Maybe it happened in a meeting, when a simple word you use all the time in casual conversation suddenly wasn't there the moment people were actually listening. Maybe it happened with a friend, mid-story, when the exact word you needed felt like it was sitting just behind a door you couldn't quite open in time. Maybe it happens most often with strangers, where the pressure to sound competent makes even easy words feel suddenly out of reach. None of that means your vocabulary is small. It means something specific is blocking access to it. And today we're going to name exactly what that is. You know the word. You've used it before. You've even written it down. And then, right in the middle of a sentence, right when you need it most, it disappears. Not because you forgot English. Because something happens in your brain the instant real pressure shows up. Something that has almost nothing to do with how much vocabulary you actually know. Here's what's really going on. Your brain doesn't lose words the way you lose your keys. Misplaced somewhere and completely gone, never to be found again without a long search. It loses access to them, temporarily. The same way a locked door doesn't mean the room behind it disappeared. The word is still there. What's missing, in that exact moment, is a clear, fast path to reach it. Today, we're going to look at 5 specific reasons that path gets blocked. And for each one, a specific way to rebuild it. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this keeps happening to you, and you'll have 5 practical fixes you can start using the next time a word disappears mid-sentence, in a real conversation, not just in theory. And I'll tell you now, the third reason is the one almost nobody expects, because it has nothing to do with how many words you know, and everything to do with how much your brain is trying to do at the same exact moment. This is English Master Path, where we build real speaking confidence through small daily habits, not more grammar rules, and not another long list of words to memorize and forget by next week. Let me ask you something honestly. Has this ever happened to you while writing? Calmly? With time to think? No one waiting? No clock running? Probably far less often. That difference matters more than it seems. It tells us this isn't really a knowledge problem. It's a pressure problem. And pressure changes how your brain searches for information, even information it clearly already has. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Under pressure, your brain doesn't search calmly through everything you know. It narrows, fast, toward whatever feels safest and most familiar, which is usually your first language. That narrowing isn't a flaw. It's protective, the same mechanism that helps you react quickly in an emergency. The problem is, it's reacting to a conversation as if it were a threat, when it's really just a question you already know the answer to. Now pause for a moment and think honestly about your own pattern. When a word disappears on you, does it usually happen with strangers, with people you know well, or mostly alone in your own head while rehearsing something you never say out loud? Just notice your honest answer. That pattern is a clue, and by the end of this video, it will point you toward exactly which of the 5 reasons matters most for you. We're going to work through 5 reasons this happens, moving from the most emotional cause to the most practical one. And by the time we reach the end, they'll no longer feel like 5 separate mysteries, but like one connected picture of how speaking under pressure actually works. Stay with me, because by the middle of this video, you'll start recognizing exactly which one is happening to you in real time, which is the first step to actually fixing it. The first reason is the panic freeze, and it's usually the loudest one, even though it's rarely about the word itself. The moment you feel pressure to answer quickly, your body responds the way it would to any small stress. Your heart rate shifts slightly, your attention narrows, and your brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. Unfortunately, speed under panic almost always favors your first language, because it's the path your brain has used the longest. Think of a learner named Elif who could describe complicated topics in English calmly, alone, with no one listening. But the instant a real person asked her a direct question, even a simple one, Her mind would go completely blank on words she clearly already knew. It wasn't the vocabulary that failed her. It was the sudden spike of pressure the moment another person was actually waiting for an answer. She once described this feeling as talking underwater. The words were all still there, but something heavier than usual sat between her and actually reaching them. What eventually helped wasn't more vocabulary study at all. It was learning to recognize that exact underwater feeling the moment it started, and responding to it calmly instead of letting it snowball into a longer silence. Here's the fix. The next time a word disappears mid-sentence, don't stop and search silently, because silence usually increases the panic further. Instead, say a simple bridge phrase out loud while your brain catches up. Try saying this with me now, as if you'd just lost a word. Hold on, let me think for a second. Or, how do I say this? Say those with me. Hold on, let me think for a second. How do I say this? Notice something. You just kept speaking calmly in English while still searching. That single shift, speaking through the gap instead of freezing inside it, is often enough to lower the panic, just enough for the word to return on its own. You'll know this fix is working when the gap starts feeling shorter. Not because the word arrives instantly, but because you're no longer adding fear on top of the original pause. One mistake to avoid here: don't apologize repeatedly for forgetting a word. Every extra apology adds more pressure, which makes the next word even harder to find. A calm bridge phrase does the job far better than 3 nervous ones. If a bridge phrase still feels awkward to use in the moment, practice it first in a completely low-stakes setting. Alone, in front of a mirror, or in a quiet room with no one listening. The goal is to make the phrase itself automatic, so that when real pressure hits, you're not trying to remember a new tool and manage a missing word at the same time. Over time, something interesting tends to happen with this habit. The panic freeze itself starts arriving less often, not because every word suddenly becomes easier to find, but because your body slowly learns that a missing word isn't actually an emergency, just a small, ordinary pause that conversations can easily absorb. That shift, from treating a gap as a crisis to treating it as a normal part of speaking, does more for your fluency long-term than memorizing any additional list of words ever could. Now, once you're able to stay calm through that first panic moment, we move to a second reason that has nothing to do with fear at all, and everything to do with how the word was learned in the first place. The second reason is what we can call the passive learning trap. Many words you forget mid-sentence aren't actually unfamiliar to you. You've read them, you've heard them, you'd recognize them instantly on a page. But recognizing a word and producing it from memory are 2 completely different skills. And most vocabulary study only ever trains the first one. Consider a learner named Kwame, who had read hundreds of English articles and could understand almost anything put in front of him. Yet in conversation, common words he'd seen dozens of times would vanish the instant he needed to say them himself. His vocabulary wasn't small. His active recall of that vocabulary was simply untrained, because reading only ever asked him to recognize words, never to produce them from nothing. Kwame found this especially frustrating because, on paper, his English looked advanced. A vocabulary test would have scored him well. But a live conversation measures something a written test never touches: how quickly you can pull a word out of memory with nothing in front of you to jog it. No multiple choice, no surrounding sentence, just a gap and a need. Here's the fix. For any word you want to actually own in conversation, don't just read it, retrieve it. Close your eyes for a moment and try to recall it from memory, without looking, before checking whether you were right. Let's practice this together. Think of the word for a place where you buy bread. Don't look it down. Try to say it out loud, from memory, right now. Bakery. If you got there without looking, that's active recall. and it's a completely different mental muscle than recognizing a word on a page. Practice this daily, with just 3 to 5 words you already sort of know, but rarely say. Close your eyes, retrieve them from memory, say them out loud, then check. You'll know it's working when a word you used to only recognize starts arriving on its own, unprompted, in an actual sentence. Give this a week or 2 before expecting a noticeable change. Active recall feels harder than passive review at first, precisely because it's doing more work. And that extra effort is exactly what builds a stronger, faster retrieval path. Easier practice that only involves recognizing a word rarely translates into speaking ability. No matter how many hours you put into it, no matter how many books you've read, we've covered the emotional cause and the passive learning cause. Now let's move into something almost nobody talks about: the actual mental traffic jam happening inside your head while you're trying to speak. The third reason, the one I mentioned at the beginning, is translation overload, and it has almost nothing to do with vocabulary size at all. When you translate a thought from your first language into English before speaking, your brain is doing 2 full jobs at once: holding the original thought and converting it, word by word, into a second system. That process uses up a limited resource: your working memory, the small mental workspace your brain uses to hold information for a few seconds at a time. Picture a learner named Noor, who knew an enormous number of English words, more than most of her classmates. But in real conversation, she often lost track of a word mid-sentence, not because she didn't know it, but because her working memory was already full, holding the original thought in her first language, checking grammar, and searching for the translation, all at the same time. There simply wasn't room left to also hold the word steady until she said it. What made this especially confusing for Noor was that her written English was excellent, because writing gives you time to translate carefully, time to check grammar, time to search for the right word without any of it competing for space at once. Speaking removes that time entirely, which is exactly why translation overload shows up so much more painfully in conversation than it ever does on a page. Here's the fix, and it connects directly to something we've covered on this channel before: thinking in English directly, rather than translating. The less your brain has to hold in that limited workspace, the more room it has left over for the actual word you need. Try this small exercise right now. Instead of thinking a full sentence and then translating it, think only the next 2 or 3 words you're about to say, directly in English, no more. I want to go. Say those with me, directly, without building the whole sentence first. I want to go. Notice how much lighter that feels than trying to plan an entire sentence in advance. This matters because translation isn't just slow. It actively competes for the same mental space your vocabulary needs to stay accessible. Reducing that translation load, even slightly, often makes forgotten words far less common, not because you suddenly know more, but because your brain finally has room to hold on to what it already knew. You can practice this same small habit throughout an ordinary day, not just while watching a video. Whenever you catch yourself about to translate a full sentence in your head, pause and try to think only the next few words instead, directly in English. It will feel unfinished and slightly uncomfortable at first, the way any new mental habit does. But that discomfort fades far faster than most learners expect, usually within a couple of weeks of regular practice. If you've practiced thinking directly in English before, without translating first, you already have a head start here. Because that same skill directly protects the mental space your vocabulary needs in order to stay reachable under pressure. The 2 habits, thinking directly and remembering words, aren't separate skills at all. They quietly support each other. We've covered fear, passive learning, and mental overload. Now let's look at how words are stored in the first place. Because isolated words are simply easier to lose than connected ones. The 4th reason is isolated storage. Learning a word completely on its own, with no sentence, no context, and no emotional or practical anchor attached to it. A word with no connections is like a single item floating alone in a large room. Technically there, but very easy to lose track of under pressure. Think of a learner named Theodora, who memorized long alphabetical vocabulary lists. Word, translation, word, translation. With no example sentences attached at all, she could recognize dozens of these words on a written test. But in conversation, most of them simply weren't there when she reached for them, because they had never been connected to anything real. No situation, no feeling, no sentence she'd actually used them in before. Theodora once compared it to owning a huge box of tools with no labels and no memory of what any of them were for. Technically, everything she needed was somewhere in that box. Practically, under time pressure, an unlabeled tool is nearly as useless as no tool at all. Attaching each word to a real sentence was, in her words, like finally putting a label on every tool, so she could grab the right one without hesitating. Here's the fix. Whenever you learn a new word, immediately attach it to one real, personal sentence. Not a textbook example, your own. If the word is exhausted, don't just memorize the definition. Say, I feel exhausted after a long day at work, using your own actual situation. Try this with a word you already sort of know but rarely use. Pick one now and build one honest sentence about your own life around it, out loud. Words anchored to a real sentence, especially one connected to your own life, are dramatically easier to retrieve later, because your brain isn't just searching for a floating word anymore. It's searching for a small story that word already belongs to. That story acts like a handle, something solid to actually grab onto under pressure, instead of empty air with nothing to hold onto. One mistake to avoid here: don't try to anchor 20 new words at once. A long list of freshly anchored sentences is just as easy to lose track of as a long list of isolated words, only slightly better organized. Anchor 2 or 3 words a day, thoroughly, rather than 20 words loosely, and let each one settle into a real sentence before adding the next. We've covered 4 reasons so far: fear, passive learning, mental overload, and isolated storage. The final reason is less about memory and more about timing. And it's the one that quietly makes every other reason worse. The 5th reason is simultaneous processing overload. Trying to manage grammar, pronunciation, word choice, and meaning all at the exact same moment. Live, in real time, with someone waiting for your answer. Even fluent speakers slow down when too many of these demands hit at once. The difference is, fluent speakers have learned to let some of them go temporarily, while many learners try to get everything right simultaneously, which overloads the entire system at once. Consider a learner named Ravi, who, mid-sentence, would try to fix his grammar, choose the perfect word, and pronounce everything correctly, all in the same breath. The result wasn't more accurate English. It was frequent, complete stops, because his brain was juggling 3 demanding tasks at once, instead of one manageable one. Ravi described the feeling as trying to carry too many cups of water at once, focus too hard on any single cup, and the others start spilling. The moment he consciously let go of 2 of those cups, grammar and pronunciation, and focused only on the message getting across, the sentences started completing themselves, imperfect, but whole, and far more useful than a technically correct sentence that never got finished. Here's the fix. When you feel a word slipping away under this kind of pressure, deliberately lower your standards for everything except the message itself, just for that sentence. Let the grammar be imperfect. Let the pronunciation be rough. Keep only one job active, getting the idea across, and finish the sentence. Try it with me now. Imagine you're mid-sentence and a word disappears. Instead of freezing, you simply continue with a slightly different, simpler word. I want to buy, the thing for cutting paper. scissors. Even without pausing on precision, the message still landed. This matters because a slightly imperfect sentence that finishes is always more useful and far less discouraging than a perfect sentence that never gets said at all. Fluency isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the ability to keep going through them. Fluent speakers, even in their own first language, do this constantly without noticing. They simplify, they substitute, they occasionally use a slightly wrong word and keep moving. Because the goal of speaking was never flawless precision, it was successful communication. Giving yourself that same permission in English, deliberately, is often the fastest way to stop losing words under pressure. Because you've removed one of the competing demands that was overloading the system in the first place. Small steps, real progress. This is where most people stop, right before the part that actually changes things. Don't stop. Before we move into the final method, it's worth naming something honest, something that ties all 5 of these reasons together in a way that might make the whole picture feel less overwhelming, not more. Panic often makes translation overload worse. Isolated storage makes passive learning even harder to overcome. A word you learned in isolation, under pressure, while also translating, is essentially being asked to survive 3 difficulties stacked on top of each other at once. That's not a personal failing. It's simply what happens when several ordinary obstacles happen to land on the exact same word, at the exact same moment. This is actually good news, even though it might not feel like it at first. Because these 5 causes overlap so often, fixing even one of them tends to lighten the load on all the others. Calm down the panic even slightly, and there's suddenly a little more mental room for translation. Anchor a word to a real sentence, and it becomes easier to recall even under pressure. You don't need to solve all 5 perfectly to notice a real difference. You only need to weaken one link in a chain that was never as solid as it felt in the moment. Now let's turn everything we've covered into one simple method you can use the very next time a word disappears mid-sentence. Call it describe, don't freeze. The moment a word is missing, don't go silent, and don't apologize repeatedly. Instead, describe around it, using whatever simpler words you do have. Say what it's used for, what it looks like, or what category it belongs to, until either the word returns, or the listener understands you well enough anyway. Let's practice this together, right now. Imagine you forget the word umbrella mid-sentence. Instead of freezing, you say, I need the thing you use when it's raining to stay dry. Say that with me now. I need the thing you use when it's raining to stay dry. Notice, communication never actually stopped. That's the entire method in one small moment. Let's try one more, because this method works best once it feels automatic. Imagine you forget the word receipt while returning something at a store. Instead of stopping completely, you say, I need the paper that shows I paid for this. Say that with me. I need the paper that shows I paid for this. In both cases, the exact word wasn't available, and it didn't matter because the message still arrived, clearly, without a single silent gap. You don't need to master all 5 fixes before your next conversation. Choose the one that matched what happens to you most often while you were watching this video, and practice only that one this week. Then add a second. This isn't about fixing everything at once. It's about interrupting the one pattern that's costing you the most. Let that sentence land before you move on. Here's what we covered today: the panic freeze, and speaking calmly through the gap instead of silently inside it. The passive learning trap, and training active recall, not just recognition. Translation overload, and thinking in smaller, direct pieces instead of full translated sentences. Isolated word storage, and anchoring new words to real, personal sentences. And simultaneous processing overload, and deliberately lowering your standards for everything except the message itself. Forgetting a word mid-sentence was never proof that your English is weak. It was proof that your brain was juggling more at once than it had room for. Fear, translation, isolated memory, and too many competing goals, all at the same time. Once you understand which of these is actually happening, the fix stops feeling like more studying and starts feeling like simply removing one piece of unnecessary weight. Notice something about all 5 of these fixes. Not one of them asked you to learn more words. Every single one asked you to change something about how you access the words you already have. Calmer under pressure, more actively practiced, less burdened by translation, better anchored to something real, and freed from the pressure of doing everything perfectly at once. All 5 at the exact same moment. That's the quiet difference between a vocabulary problem and a retrieval problem, and almost everyone watching this video has been treating the second one as if it were the first, for years, without ever realizing it. If you've spent years feeling embarrassed every time a word disappeared mid-sentence, consider a different way to see it. That gap was never a verdict on how much English you know. It was a signal, pointing to one specific, fixable pattern: fear, passive learning, translation load, isolated storage, or overload. And now you know exactly which questions to ask yourself the next time it happens. The next time it happens. And it will happen again. Because it happens to fluent speakers too. Try not to treat it as proof of anything. Treat it as information. Was that panic? Was that a word you'd only ever recognized, never spoken? Was your mind translating a full sentence instead of thinking directly? Was the word never anchored to anything real? Or were you simply trying to do too many things correctly at once? Whichever answer feels true, you now have a specific, small fix waiting for it, instead of a vague sense that your English simply isn't good enough. Tonight, pick one of the 5 fixes we covered and use it on purpose, even in a small, low-stakes moment, just to prove to yourself it works. Tell me in the comments, which of these 5 reasons felt the most familiar? The panic freeze, the passive learning trap, translation overload, isolated storage, or trying to do everything at once, all in the same breath? If this helped you understand your own mind a little better, subscribe to English Master Path. We build real speaking confidence here, one honest, doable habit at a time. And if you only remember one thing from today, let it be this: a missing word is not a missing skill, it's a blocked path. And every path that's blocked can be reopened, sometimes with a calmer breath, sometimes with a bit more practice, sometimes simply by giving yourself permission to say it imperfectly and keep going anyway. That fear you feel right before a word disappears, it's normal. It's not proof that you don't know English, and it never was. Small steps, real progress. And the next time a word goes missing mid-sentence, you'll finally know exactly what to do instead of freezing, quietly, calmly, and without a single wasted apology.